The 1980s were marked by some changes in the Kharkiv School of Photography. Traditional interventions in photographic images such as collages and solarizations fell out of favor. The emphasis on a professional approach, technical perfection, and clear messaging was questioned, leading photographers to search of inspiration in their amateur status. Amateur photography is defined by deliberately generic compositions and poor quality prints, full of shortcomings and cliches. It appears to be superficial and engaged in banal, insignificant subjects. At the same time, amateur strategies were the perfect tool for representing the monotonous grey reality. As Boris Mikhailov recalls the early 1980s, my dramatic impulse to search of ideal beauty or childishness gradually fades when I face the surrounding life. A wall, a bulletin board, inaccuracy, a boring portrait of a contemporary, a boring genre, a boring landscape. Even the policeman is surprised. What's beautiful about it? As if to prove that there is no beauty here. What there is frozen day-to-dayness and stagnation. The word boring, repeated in Mikhailov's quote, accurately describes the period. The Soviet system underwent a crisis at that time, trapped in a loop of repeating the same ideological formulas and rituals, like parades or legislative elections. Their gradual exhaustion created a gap, a void between the unfulfilled socialist project and unsightly reality. Artists attempted to point at this gap, creating a similar sense of emptiness in their works. It was achieved by minimizing the means of expression and addressing mundane life and the slowness of time. Lithuanian researcher Agnė Narušytė uses the collocation "the aesthetics of boredom" as a metaphor for interpreting the artworks of Lithuanian social landscape photography of the 1980s. She points out some parallels with the changes that took place in international art, particularly both in the US and the Soviet Union between the 1950s and 1980s. Narušytė refers to the practices of the most conceptual artists like Ilya Kabakov and the Collective Action Group. Yet she argues that it was Boris Mikhailov who created the most notable works on the subject of boredom. Mikhailov started frequenting Moscow in the late 1970s, early 1980s, becoming an important figure in the local alternative art scene. But it had been long before the time that he started producing series of dull and seemingly random cityscapes, like in the Black Archive series from the 1960s. This tendency became more articulated and intentional in the early 1980s when the artist made several series with image text works where photographs were accompanied by inscriptions of all sorts. Unfinished Dissertation is arguably the most well-known among them. It's a fragmented monologue of Mikhailov, intertwined with quotes and thoughts from both Western philosophers like Walter Benjamin and Eastern teachings like Buddhism. The prints and descriptions are pasted on the verso side of a found unfinished dissertation manuscript. Photography here is intentionally bland, loose both in its grayish rendering that lacks contrast and in its uneventful content. According to Mikhailov, images here serve not as the main element but as a commentary on the text. This symbiosis creates tension, which prompts the viewer to experience the feeling of viscous and stagnant epoch. The texts in Unfinished Dissertation also shape some key principles of the new photographicity. A photographer should seek to describe the time. For that, the language of anonymity and grayness was the most relevant. Mikhailov advocated for creating an illusion of chronological distance from contemporaneity, emphasizing the need for images to appear old and familiar to evoke anachronistic feel. A parallel line of thought was developed by the new generation of the Kharkiv School of Photography. A significant part of that generation were the members of the Kontakte group. It was founded in the mid-1980s by Misha Pedan, Igor Manko, Gennady Maslov, Leonid Pesin, Boris Redko, Konstantin Melnik, and Volodymyr Starko. The name of this group, which can be translated as contacts, hints at the drive for collective action that has never really withered in the Kharkiv community. The group gradually transformed. Gennady Maslov, who was an interpreter, left for military service in Ethiopia, and Sergei Bratkov joined the group in 1987. Around that time, it was renamed to Gazprom. Gazprom is the name of a large governmental building in the center of Kharkiv and one of the city's most recognizable locations. It is the first skyscraper in the USSR, erected in the constructivist style in 1928. The word Gazprom is the Russian abbreviation for state industry, indicating it was created for an office for trusts. The Ukrainian version of the abbreviation is Держпром. Gazprom sets itself in opposition to the ideas from the previous framing group, advocating for working with unmanipulated images. Despite this stance, some Gazprom members experimented with image interventions. Redko incorporated graphic characters into his lyrical landscapes of Saltivka, a residential area in Kharkiv. Igor Manko used toning in series such as Town Motives with Clouds. Captured in Astana, Kazakhstan's capital, there his in-laws lived and his family sought refuge after the Chernobyl disaster. In examining Manko's images, it becomes challenging to discern the photographer's focus, be it a basketball court, dumpster, or telephone booth. The artist deliberately aimed at blurring the line between what to consider important and what not. Volodymyr Starko achieved a similar surrealistic effect by manipulating object scales and framing. In his work Flock, discarded caps on the ground, likely left by cadets, create an image reminiscent of flocking birds. Another example is found in his photograph Theater, where what initially seems like rows of black tombstones covered with grass turns out to be armrests of a former audience chairs in an abandoned summer theater, with children playing on the stage. The distance and rhythm in organizing objects within the frame transform them into a melancholic trompe-l'oeil. While Manko and Starko played with the relevance between objects and the foreground, making them almost indistinguishable, Misha Pedan, a member of the Gazprom group, approached their relations differently. Pedan focused on the connections between people and the time they live in. In his series M, named after the letter commonly used to mark metro entrances in Ukraine, Pedan covertly photographed fellow passengers during his daily trips to work in the Kharkiv underground. Their mostly tedious and detached faces resonate with the atmosphere of boredom documented by Mikhailov. The documentary genre, initially frowned upon by the early Kharkiv school of photography for its perceived ideological engagement, gained prominence in the 1980s. Even artists from the Vremya group occasionally embraced it. For example, Evgeny Pavlov in 1983 made alcohol psychosis series at the local psychiatric hospital. The series was quite controversial for the Soviet state, which wanted to depict the USSR as an ideal society without any problems. So, to exhibit it, a whole show dedicated to the propaganda of sobriety was organized. And Pavlov's images were presented as warnings against immoderate drinking. The artist photographed a patient in a state of delirium. Close-ups and acute angles monumentalized the pain and suppression, infusing classical art expressivity into social issue. Kharkiv photographers constantly subverted the limitations of photography, ingesting it with personal meanings and expanding its borders with the help of other media. For instance, in the archival series, Evgeny Pavlov worked with the body of photographs he had accumulated over 2 decades. Those were straight black and white shots made in a variety of situations, from civic defense training to street scenes. Instead of concealing and retouching scratches, dust, and other defects of the images, the photographer emphasized the deficiencies with even more coloring. This way, the accent was shifted from the narrative of the photographed subjects to the very body of the print and photographic process. At the same time, it also mirrors the constant struggle of photographers against poor quality photographic materials and the quality of life in the late Soviet epoch. And once again, we see how the artist's voice is brought to the foreground of the artwork with the help of eloquent interventions in the print. Subjective perspectives became integral to documentary projects in the Kharkiv School of Photography. Roman Petkovka, a representative of the second generation, exemplified this in his maternity hospital project. Capturing impressions from photography in the pathology, labor, and delivery department, Petkovka described it as a subjective reportage. Access to such institutions was typically restricted in the USSR, but Petkovka gained entry by creating photographs for a doctor's dissertation. Struck by the conditions and the detachment of medical personnel, Petkovka overpainted prints with three colors: red for blood, blue for the coldness of the delivery rooms, and yellowish for the scent of the iodine, creating a vivid portrayal that surpassed pure black and white photography. Objectiveness is typically assigned as the key trait of documentary photography, especially in the context of Soviet reportage. But Kharkiv photographers replace it with first-person narrations. This tendency branched further into a specific corpus of project with their works which can be described as performative photography. These are not simply staged photoshoots, but a series in which photographers and their closest circle, like other photographers and family, became the protagonists. In 1982, Boris Mikhailov and several other photographers from Kharkiv, Natalia and Valery Cherkashiny and Oleg Grunzovsky, were having a vacation on the Black Sea. During it, Mikhailov created the series Crimean Snobbery, which featured him and his friends posing for the camera and mocking cliches of touristic snapshots. Even in stage shots, Mikhailov employed amateur photography codes. Evgeny Pavlov shaped his practice around the dialogue with classical art, particularly in the mythology series. The imagery contained references to plots from the history of Western art, from Laocoon and his sons Judi's beheading Holofernes to the scandalous luncheon on the grass by Manet. The wide-angle lens wraps the natural perspective for a disorienting and dreamlike experience. And once again, like in the case of the Crimean Snobbery, it's the photographers and their close ones performing for the camera. Mythologies are the collaborative effort of Pavlov, his wife Tatiana, Mikhailov, and their kids. There are several key aspects to this. First of all, it is a bold gesture of blurring the very concept of authorship. Secondly, when a photography is both the object and the subject of the work, it offsets the tension of questioning around the ethics of photography and exploiting models. Lastly, since the most of the Kharkiv photographers didn't have their own studios and hiring models, especially for their edgy ideas, was hardly possible, it was themselves and their closest circle who were the most available and non-problematic material to work with. Photographers in Kharkiv often found themselves as both the object and subject of their work, making the therapeutic aspect of photography apparent. Sergei Solonsky, a second-generation photographer, turned to this practice in the 1980s, spending much of the decade in solitary darkroom work. It was after Perestroika and in the 1990s, after the collapse of the USSR, when he became more available and visible in the Kharkiv community. At the same time, the 1990s were an extremely ambiguous period, A search for creative energy and passion for work was mixed with social insecurity and suffocating depression of the era. As Solonsky recalls, every morning he woke up with a clear feeling that to survive through the depression, he had to go and start doing something. Photography became therapy for the author. His self-portrait nude series, Oscillations, exhibited alongside metal plates engraved with movement trajectories, visualizing rhythm and oscillation as the essence of all things. The blurred figures resulting from the long exposure capturing the author's movement conveyed a sense of insecurity and unrest reflective of the epoch. The works of the Kharkiv School of Photography seamlessly blend personal narratives with responsive reactions to social shifts. This responsiveness reached its pinnacle with the Fast Reaction Group, founded around 1994 by Boris Mikhailov, Sergei Bratkov, Sergei Solonsky and Vita Mikhailov, Boris' wife. Going beyond photography, group delved into performances, installations, and videos, responding to the rapid changes in Ukrainian society after the USSR's collapse. They also managed the artist-run gallery Up and Down, a pioneering venue for contemporary art in Kharkiv. The Fast Reaction Group's only specifically photographic series was If I Were German. It was created under the impression of two historical events: the withdrawal of Russian ground forces from Germany and a speech by the Russian president at that time, Boris Yeltsin, about the forgiveness toward the Germans. These events led the artists to contemplate the issues surrounding historical memory. In their project statement, they detail inquiries made to two groups: war-era witnesses and the younger generation. The response revealed varied perspectives on the German soldier, portraying him as a strong opponent with sometimes human weaknesses and culturally even kind individual. The younger generation was drawn to the image of the new democratic and prosperous Germany. The Fast Reaction Group critically reflected on these distortions of historical memory. They dressed in the SS uniforms and staged grotesque scenes to explore the psychology of the victim and the oppressor. The artists delved into complex emotions like guilt and responsibility, asking, what if we had been German during that time? What would we have behaved towards others? If I Were German, highly provocative even in today's context, received immediate attention both within the former Soviet realm and in the West. This illustrates the change that took place after the disintegration of the USSR. International attention, absence of censure, and the promise of new possibilities created the feeling of the heavy flow of freedom, yet it was quickly poisoned by the severity of social and economic realities. The rapid transformation was shock-like for a significant part of the post-Soviet population that didn't manage to adapt to the new realities. Boris Mikhailov documented this traumatic dissolution of the Soviet fabric in his seminal series By the Ground and At Dusk, done 2 years apart in 1991 and 1993. Both of them are panoramic shots taken with the Horizon camera, the production of which started in 1967, and the instruction manual advised using cameras for photographing architectural ensembles, mountains and forest landscapes, and also festivities and crowded gatherings. So Horizon was meant to capture large-scale objects at far distance. Mikhailov subverted that logic, bringing the camera close to the wretched queues and bodies lying on the streets of Kharkiv. The downward tilt of the camera conveyed the feeling of being pressed to the ground under the weight of crumbling system. The chemical toning of prints with sepia in the series By the Ground evokes associations with the soil and dirt, simultaneously giving the anachronistic and nostalgic sense of old imagery. The blue toning of the series At Dusk had personal meaning for Mikhailov, rooted in his wartime childhood. He transmitted this association of blue with war on the collapsing post-Soviet society. Tintin print spans a broad emotional spectrum, and it found diverse applications among Kharkiv photographers, notably in the creative works of the Kochubinska family, father Victor and son Sergei. Victor became a professional photographer in the 1960s, working as a darkroom master or a photojournalist for different periodicals. While not a part of the Vremya group, he forged friendship within it, particularly with Boris Mikhailov, whose influence inspired Victor to explore creative photography. During his journalistic assignments or simply walking across the city, he documented the unadorned ordinary life that would have never made it into the press. But unlike Mikhailov, who had a tense and critical perception of the surrounding reality, Victor's view was more loosely poetic and ironic. He started working together with his son Sergei, who also pursued a career in photojournalism. Under the influence of Mikhailov's luriki, the Kochutovs also started employing hand coloring in their photographs, often combining it with the panoramic format. Very often they worked with the archival images that had been made back in the 1970s or 1980s and colored them only later in the 1990s. The images have a diary-like quality focused on minor humdrum scenes. The photographers often included themselves in the frame, underscoring the camera as an omnipresent extension of their daily optics. On the versus side of the images, the photographers regularly traced locations where an image was taken, as well as some commentaries on it. Despite the quiet banality, their compositions exude motion. Bicycles heading somewhere, cats passing by, and pedestrians crossing streets. This dynamism resonates with the prevalent perception of the post-Soviet territory as an area in constant flux. This instability pervaded the whole society, leading to some dramatic mutations. They were observed by Boris Mikhailov in his most widely discussed series titled Case History. For this series, the artist photographed homeless people whose number increased dramatically in Ukraine in the 1990s. But the photographer didn't sneak portraits. He asked people to pose, often in positions that recall Christian iconography, like the Descent from the Cross. Other images were made in some apartments, revealing a striking unbelonging of people to home. The photographs of interiors are combined with street shots filled with lost, stray-like people. Mikhailov regarded their bruised, ulcered bodies that became a visual allegory for the decaying collective body. In one of his interviews, Mikhailov explained the urge to document this underrepresented part of Ukrainian society. Soviet history teaches us, don't look at the negative stuff. When capitalism began, it too was trying to stand on its feet and would say, everything's fine, there is no need to look at that, there is no need to pay attention to this. One can say that it had the same tasks as socialism. The late 1990s were filled with the disappointment of the unrealized aspirations post-Soviet societies had when shifted to the capitalist system. Sergei Bratkov's 1996 series, Princesses, highlights these fragile dreams. The portraits depict young women sitting in a Kharkiv fertility clinic, each with her tights lowered down and semen sample container in her lap, symbolizing their dreams of finding Prince Charming. The containers bear the names of the real-life European royalty. As Bratkov commented, all of them dreamed of conceiving from a prince, but after all, they all conceived from a soldier. In his series Kids, Bratkov demonstrated that even after these children had been born, they were quickly turned into the tools for achieving phantom goals. While photographing for modeling portfolios, including those of children, the artist observed parents dressing their kids in overtly adult-like and provocative manner. This commodification of the youngest bodies reflects, to a certain extent, the Western archetype of the infantile and sensual post-Soviet society that the society itself thought to emulate. The late 1990s, early 2000s were marked by a certain stagnation of the Kharkiv School of Photography. Many of its representatives left Ukraine, like Boris Mikhailov, who moved to Germany. In response to the dwindling artistic scene, in Kharkiv, a new generation of artists emerged. In 2005, Mykola Ridny, Hanna Kriventsova, Bela Logachova, and Olena Polyashenko established the Soska Gallery Lab. Following the tradition of artist-run spaces like the Up-Down Gallery, Soska became a vital alternative venue for experimental and socially engaged art. Simultaneously, Ridny, Kriventsova, and Sergei Popov formed the eponymous group Soska. Inspired by Boris Mikhailov's work and the fast reaction group activities, they freely traversed mediums from actionism to video and photography. Their focus spanned a wide array of issues, with some projects critiquing the art market, as seen in the video Barter. The Soska group exchanged printed copies of contemporary works by renowned artists such as Andy Warhol or Cindy Sherman with villages for farm products. Video interviews captured the new owners explaining their choices and where they planned to display the artworks. Simultaneously, Ridny, Kriventsova, and Popov keenly observed the social landscape. Their Dreamers project reflects on the fragility and infantile uncertainty characteristic of Ukrainian society in the 2000s, embodied in the images of the MOKSOP culture. The portraits of levitating teenagers are complemented by videos in which they express sentiments like, "My heart is full of tears. What will be tomorrow? The world is so strange." The collective spirit endured in Kharkiv, giving rise to the formation of the Shilo Group in 2010. Initially founded by Sergei Lebedynsky, Vladislav Krasnoshok, Vadim Trikos, and Vasilisa Nezabarum, the group currently comprises Krasnoshok and Lebedynsky. Their explicit goal is to continue the traditions of the Kharkiv School of Photography, restraining a focus on the materiality of photography, employing analog printing techniques, and addressing social issues, often in a performative way. In their series Timoshenko's Escape, the photographers reacted to the imprisonment of Yulia Tymoshenko, a famous politician with a recognizable crown braid. She was one of the symbols of the Orange Revolution in 2004. She was the first political prisoner in contemporary Ukrainian history and was jailed in Kharkiv. The photographers mirrored the absurdity of this political theater with an equally theatrical and travesty gesture. They bought Tymoshenko's masks and staged her escape through the night streets of Kharkiv. The new generation of the Kharkiv School of Photography observed the mounting tensions as the government's policies diverged further from the pro-European aspirations of the population. The culmination of these tensions occurred during Euromaidan in January 2014, which the Shilo Group documented in their series Euromaidan. They utilized the Lis print technique, known for its lithium developer, that produces highly contrasted images with fewer halftones. The unpredictable results of this process, influenced by factors such as timing, developer wear, and photopaper quality, ensure that no two Lis prints are identical. This characteristic creates a unique equilibrium between the photographer's agency and the photographic material. Lebedynsky and Krasnoshok see this special haptic aesthetic of Lis prints not as a reference to the past, but rather as a trace of the dynamics of history. The velvet shadows of the images are more like the soot left by burning tires and Molotov cocktails. A necessary disclaimer here is that this overview has touched upon only a small fraction of the projects that belong to the Kharkiv School of Photography. Yet, they already give us an idea of some of the main characteristics of the phenomena. Being isolated from many professional institutions and markets during the Soviet era and hardly getting any proper access to it in Ukraine even after regaining the independence, the activity of Kharkiv photographers was mostly as disinterested production of leisure time. This created the space of freedom for experimenting with technical, formal, and civic elements of photographic practice. What had begun as a strive for legitimizing photography as an art form evolved into a habit of critical outlook on both the medium itself and the current social agenda.